Good evening. Rabbi Tov, everyone. It's been a difficult day for Am Yisrael. Started off this morning, we heard the terrible news of the Piguim in Yerushalayim, and it goes without saying, our thoughts are with those who've been affected. The family of the young boy who was murdered. And of course, we pray for the full recovery for all those who are injured, who are in hospital. The Torah that we learn together should be for a refuah shlema. So last night we spoke about a shayla to do with hilchot tefillah. I want to carry on, explain one or two of the cases which we alluded to last night. Just look at some of the questions that come out of that as well. So we spoke about the individual's responsibility to be part of the tzibur and to make sure that the tzibur has a minyan to be able to daven together. Mentioned the fact that the Yerushalmi, and we'll see it inside the Ramah in a few moments, very harsh words for somebody who is part of a tzibur and decides to leave and to walk out in the middle and to leave people davening as they are. But one of the questions that comes up, so we mentioned what happens if you started off, yesterday's question was about where you have a minyan ordinarily, and for whatever reason, some people decided not to be part of that minyan one day, not to join. So normally they had 10, they were left with 7. To what extent do we have a responsibility to keep the minyan going? There are other minyanim in the town, other shuls where people can go. That was last night. Now the question is, let's say you have a minyan to start off with, but sometimes it happens, you begin with the minyan, by the time you get to the end of davening, especially if it takes a long time, you no longer have a minyan. Or sometimes in the middle, you don't have. What you find sometimes, what's more common, is when you go through Chazarat Hashatz, the Chazan is repeating the Amidah, gets to the end of the brachot, and you have 10 people physically present in the room, but nobody's answering Amen. You don't have 10 people that are actually there. The Shulchan Aruch writes that therefore a person needs to be very, very careful when you're listening to Chazarat Hashatz. You should imagine that there are not 10 people without you, so as to ensure that you have a minyan of people answering. But what happens if you actually don't have a minyan of people answering? You began the Chazarat Hashatz, there were 10 people, and somebody walked out before the end. Or what happens if you got to the end of Chazarat Hashatz and you had 10 people, but then somebody walked out and you still have parts of davening, you have Kaddish, you have other things to go which need a minyan. In fact, once this happened to me when I was in the army, the first and only time in my life where I was Bal Musaf for Yom Kippur. So it was actually not during my active service, afterwards when I was doing Hesder. Every year, I don't know if they still do it, I imagine they do. The Rabbanut HaTzva'it sends before Pesach and Yom Kippur, they send soldiers from Hesder units to go to different bases to help make up minyanim, to help run the Seder, to help do run the Tefillah of Yom Kippur. Okay. There was nobody else who could step up to be the Baal Tefillah, so I was davening. We went to a certain base, I don't remember where it was, but most of the Chayalim had gone home for Yom Kippur. There were a number that had stayed behind. We davened Kol Nidre. The shul was full, the shul on the base, probably about this big, was full. There was nowhere to move. We came for Shachrit in the morning, whatever time it was. I think there were maybe 6 of us who had come to the base, especially 6 Hesder soldiers who had come to help make up the minyan. And we came in the morning, we were the only ones there. And there was no one there. We were waiting. Eventually it was quite a big base. We found some people. They all came back from Neila, don't worry. But I hadn't davened yet. This was before I started davening. You'll hear, in a moment, you'll hear what happened after I started davening. But, so there were 6 of us. Eventually, another 2 came from somewhere, and we were waiting. We got up to Baruch Hu, we waited. And eventually we had just 10 people for the minyan. Okay. 2 soldiers came. I remember they came, they sat in the front, picked up a kippah from the front, from the shul. Anyway, Yom Kippur, it's a long service. Obviously didn't like my davening. That was why it was the last time. And I remember got to the end of Musaf, got to the end of Chazarat Hashatz, and I was about to say Kaddish. And somebody came up to me and said, they've left. You don't have your minyan anymore. So at the time I didn't know the halacha. So they told me to stop, so I stopped. But what was that the correct thing to do? So that is one scenario. What about, we'll take it further because we'll get to this question that was asked, where if you know in the first place, before you start, that you're going to get a minyan, but the minyan's not going to stay there until the end, right? What about that? Can you go into that situation and can you carry on? And this is a scenario we used to have in another shul in Yerushalayim. We used to daven. It would happen on a Friday morning. There was a minyan for Shachrit. It was very, very difficult to get a minyan for whatever reason. And people would go and they would mention this yesterday, would go and ask somebody walking past, minyan. Shachrit, they would say, I can come, but I can only stay, until the end of the Chazara. So from the beginning that you're only going to have a person davening until the end of the Chazara. Could you then still continue? And could you say the parts that you need a minyan for when you don't have a minyan at the end? Okay, so why is all of this a question? So first of all, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, this is in Siman Nun Hey, which is called Dinei Kaddish, but going through the halachot of Kaddish during Tefillah and all the end of Tefillah after Chazarat Hashatz. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us that so you started off saying Kaddish. We started saying Kedusha, which obviously needs a minyan, needs 10 people. And some of them left in the middle, right? It's not recommended, don't leave in the middle, but some people did. So says the Shulchan Aruch, so long as the majority are still there, you don't have the minyan, but you have the majority, you still have 6. You can carry on and you can finish, so long as you started. So if you started the Chazarat Hashatz, and you had a minyan, then you can carry on. What about the Kaddish that comes? This is our case on Yom Kippur. What about the Kaddish that comes afterwards? Because now you could say, well, you started the Chazarat. You had a minyan for that when you began, so it was fine to continue. But once that's finished, you're onto something new, which is the Kaddish. So says the Ramah, and it's based on the Shumat Hadeshen. He says that actually, that the Kaddish, in fact, the 2 Kaddishes which come after, because you have the half Kaddish, and then after you have the Kaddish Titkabal as well. Titkabal means, may our prayers be accepted. Titkabal Tzlaton. Which prayer is that referring to? Referring to Shemona Esrei. So therefore, it's part of the same unit. So even if you lost your minyan during the Chazara, you could still go now and you could still say that Kaddish. So in that situation where I should have said the Kaddish, at the time I didn't know, didn't say it. But that's all if it happened b'diavad, right? Can you put yourself in that situation in Katchila? And over here, the question was a bit more complicated as well for the following reason. All this we're talking about, if you daven together, you had a minyan that's davening, and then you start off the Chazara, right? Somebody left halfway through the Chazara or at the beginning of the Chazara, and now you no longer have your minyan. You can still finish. You can still say the Kaddish. But what if that person left and they weren't even part of the minyan to begin with? Meaning they weren't actually davening with you. The situation was you started off, you say you have 9 people that are davening together. You ask the 10th, can you come and can you join? So now here's the question. So the person joined. They weren't actually davening with you, but they were there and they were sitting there halfway through. Halfway through, they left. Can you still carry on? And can you say that? Can you say that Chazara? Can you say that Kaddish? Can you ask that person to join you in the first place, knowing that they'll leave? And if you're that person and walking through on your way to a meeting and you get asked to join, should you stop and should you join? Or is it better to say, sorry, you don't have a minyan, I can't do it, and I'm going? So, two or maybe 3 parts to this. First part is having the 10 people there together to daven the Shemona Esrei. Is that in itself tefillah b'tzibur or not? So the poskim are split on this, and everybody says you can daven together once you've got 10. It's obviously better that all 10 are actually davening. All 10 are actually davening. That is for sure called tefillah b'tzibur. If you have only 6 that are davening and the other 4 are just being mitzaref, okay, that's a lower level. According to some poskim, that's still called tefillah b'tzibur. According to others, no, that's not called tefillah b'tzibur. That's just you have permission to say those things, to say those dvarim shebek dusha, but it's not actually, you don't actually have a minyan. The reason you can say it is because of a principle of, which we find in a number of places in halakha, rubo kakulo, right? That when you have the majority of something, it's as if you have the whole thing. What rubo kakulo means, it can't create something out of nothing. It means that, so I have 10 people, the majority of them haven't davened, so then I can say that I have based on the majority that we can all daven together. I can't say, you might think rubo kakulo if you were going to take it to the extreme. So if you have the majority, so you have 6 people, that's the majority of a minyan, say rubo kakulo, so we can do everything with 6. No, you need the 10 people to be there, and then we can invoke rubo kakulo. Okay. That's step number one. But assuming this is happening, so the poskim don't differentiate in terms of the halacha we mentioned before, of carrying on saying the repetition, carrying on saying the Kaddish once we've started, as to whether all 10 were part of the minyan, all 10 were davening, all 10 were not davening. They do discuss the question of, can you enter that situation in the first place? Right? We're going to start the Chazarah, but we know that somebody's leaving before the end. So the Rav Palim, the Ben Ish Chai, says you're not allowed to do that in the first place. If you know going into it that somebody is going to leave, you're creating this b'diavad situation where you're going to have to rely on a not ideal situation, then no, don't do it in the first place. Don't do that. Other poskim disagree. Other poskim say that it's okay. The reason again why this is going to be so difficult from the perspective of the one who's coming in and the one who would leave is because the Shulchan Aruch writes, the Rama says that if where he says that, right, we saw the Shulchan Aruch who said, so long as you have the majority of the minyan there, you can carry on. Says Rama, Mikom Makom, Aveirahi Latzet. Nonetheless, you should know it is a great sin to leave. Va'aleihem ne'emar, and the people who leave and leave the rest of the tzibur without a minyan, ne'emar v'ozvei Hashem yikalu, those who leave Hashem will be destroyed. Right, it's based on the Yerushalmi. Aval im nisharu asara mutar latzet. If 10 are left, then you can go out if you need to. The Biur Halacha asked an interesting question. It says, if the 10th person left, now you're only left with 9, now you need to leave as well. Can the 9th person leave? Already they don't have a minyan. Are you still subject to that avera or not? He lives in a tzarich iyun, just by the way. So that's in terms of that. But so the question is that if you were there davening in the first place, if you said, in the first instance, they said, can you join? He said, I can join, but I have to leave early. So Shlomo Zalman is quoted as saying that this would not apply in this case to the individual who's coming to join, because the benefit, if you weren't going to join, they wouldn't have had a minyan at all. There would be no chazarat hashas. So in this case, he says that would be okay, and therefore you could join. The question gets further is, if the scenario is the person says, I'm going to leave not during Chazarat Hashatz, I'm going to leave at the end of Chazarat Hashatz. Now the question is whether you can still say the Kaddish afterwards or not. So the Mishnah Berurah says, this whole din that we're talking about where you're not allowed to leave in the middle, means if you leave in the middle. But if you leave at the end of when the certain inyan is finished, you leave at the end of one section before another section, then you wouldn't be subject to the same. So he says, for example, you came just for Baruch Hu, and then you left after Baruch Hu, then it wouldn't be, obviously if they need a minyan, but that wouldn't be subject to this Avera, because that's the end of a section. So our question is, if you leave at the end of Shmona Esrei, at the end of Chazarat Hashatz, before the Kaddish, is that the end of a section? On the one hand, you could say, well, it's the end of a section because it's the end of the Shmona Esrei. On the other hand, we just said that since the Kaddish that comes afterwards is still, you could still say, even if part of your minyan's left, it belongs together with the Chazarat Hashatz itself, and therefore we could view all of that as one section. So the Mishnah Berurah says, really, we should view it all together as one. We should view the Chazarah together with the Kaddish that comes afterwards, that is all one complete section, and one shouldn't leave in the middle. Other poskim, Esher Avraham writes that these are two separate sections. You left before one, that would be okay if there was a reason to do so, and the cow could still carry on and say the Kaddish afterwards. So at the end, putting it all together, there was a very, very interesting Kiddush, which is brought in the Sefer of Eretz Chemda, relating to this case, where they said the following. They said, if you are the minyan, and you are the 9 people, and you're going out into the street and asking somebody else to come and join you, and that person says, I can join you, but I'm going to have to leave early. So then the Aveirah for leaving early, it's not on him, it's on you as part of the minyan. And you as part of the minyan, similar to what we said yesterday, would have that responsibility to go out, to find that person, to find that individual who can come and make up the minyan. But if you're in the position where you're asked to come and join, but you have that limited time, the conclusion was that yes, that would be permitted, and that would not be subject to the curse or anything else. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash